Hi everyone and welcome to Make It Happen TV. I'm Spencer Lodge and I'm joined today with Mr. Super Knowledgeable, Super Guru, Super Data Specialist, all right? So I want you to really listen to what this guy's got to say. Matthew Renze is with me. He's a data science consultant, but not only that, this guy has got a brilliant mind, and if there's stuff that you don't pick up from this interview, then I'll be lost and I give up. I'll throw the towel in, okay, and it should be all over. But as you know, I often talk to you about some of the problems that we face where salespeople are stuck in this mindset of using old-fashioned technology or old-fashioned processes, out-of-date systems that really don't help them develop and grow, where lots of other industries have really gone and done sensible things by using smart technology and data to help develop and grow their businesses. So first of all, Matthew, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
For those of you that don't know, Matt and I, we've met a few times before. Matt's partner, Heather, works with us and some of the businesses that I'm involved with. And you've seen Heather on the show with her growth hacking interviews with me. So if you haven't seen those, go and check them out as well, because Heather is just a joy to work with too. And so having the chance to spend time with Matt and Heather, pick their brains and learn what they know, and for them to add the kind of value that they do is really important. So getting him on the show was great for us. Now, you and I come essentially from completely different worlds, okay? We've become friends, but we come from a completely different backgrounds, not just geographically, but with our education and our kind of like our business acumen as well. For the benefit of everybody that's watching this episode right now, can we just explain in 1 minute what it is that a data scientist does?
So as a data science consultant, essentially what I do is help people make better decisions with data. In addition, I also try automating certain decision-making processes as well, using tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I think that's the shortest way I can explain what a data science consultant does.
Okay. So how did you get into that?
So interestingly, almost all of the things that I've done over my career have involved working with large sets of data and essentially helping people make better decisions with them. So the software I was creating right out of college the first time was essentially systems that were helping people make geographic information system decisions. So essentially things like working with county assessors and auditors, treasurers, to help them tax properties properly and to make sure that people weren't overpaying for their properties. And a bunch of other things. I also did stuff involving energy data management as well, where we were trying to help building owners reduce the cost of their energy by optimizing based on all of the sensor data that was coming out of the building. So taking all of those kind of things I was doing in my career, I realized that I kind of hit like a plateau and that I needed to go back to college again in order to get to the next level. So I went back and I studied computer science, philosophy, and economics, focusing specifically on artificial intelligence and machine learning. And when I came back out into the industry, this new term data scientist had started to emerge. So I decided that, this data scientist thing, like this is me, this is what I've been doing all along. I just didn't have a title for it yet. So I transitioned into consulting and then began doing data science consulting for clients in the area, eventually went independent, and now I essentially train people on this stuff all over the world for large companies, Fortune 100 companies, Microsoft, you name it, that's what I do.
Now, you obviously are exposed to many companies that have employed bad practices, better practices, and great practices. Do you notice that there's a common theme over and over again with either the way that companies approach this type of stuff or the people within those organizations anyway?
Yeah, I think the biggest common theme is that there are, I don't want to polarize this too much, but there's really two kinds of people. There's the kind of people that are operating under the old mindset of how the world used to work, and the people that are operating around the mindset of how the world currently works. And the best metaphor I've heard for this was explained by a professor by the name of Eddie Obang. A few years ago, he did a TED Talk, and he talked about this concept he referred to as the world after midnight. So I'll have to kind of point to the camera to explain this, but
take it away.
If you imagine a timeline, you've got time on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis you have two curves. One is the growth rate at which human beings learn, and so that curve has been growing slowly over time over the past, however many years, 100 years or so. And then you've got a second curve that starts lower than that first curve, which is the rate at which society, markets, and technologies are changing. And that curve has grown faster, and at some point here in the middle, there was this intersection. And at that intersection, the world, the dynamics, the entire way the world operated actually flipped almost overnight. But there are people now that are still operating in the old world, the way the world used to operate, where things like having bureaucracy, the mass of things, essentially Let me explain it this way, that the gap between when you have an idea for a product and when you make money on that product was a lot larger. So you could essentially sit back, you could design a product, you could do marketing research, you could figure all this stuff out, and then design your product, get it out to market, and still have several years to capture revenue before your competitors catch up, before preferences change, or before technology makes it obsolete. In the new world, the world after midnight, you essentially have an entirely different set of dynamics. So the markets, technology, and people's preferences are changing faster than you can learn to adapt to them. So you have to change the way you behave in order to capture that market. So rather than building the product and having a bunch of time, you essentially have to be designing the product as you're gathering feedback on it. So getting something out to market as quickly as possible with a minimum viable product, or even doing something even less costly than a minimum viable product, essentially just doing research to even find out whether your problem is the correct problem to be solving, whether your solution is the correct solution to that problem, and then whether it's going to be sticky, whether it will have virality, whether there's even a business growth and scaling model before you're even you have to be capturing revenue from almost day one in order to operate in this new world. But we've got people that are operating rationally in the constraints of the old world, thinking that the old world is still how things operate, and that would make perfect sense in that old world. However, the world is actually completely different. And this isn't a trivial distinction between this old world and new world. These are fundamentally different ways in which you approach business and way you approach building products, technology, and essentially getting feedback on things in order to optimize your moving through this world.
Let me just think about this for a second, because I know a lot of old world people.
Yep.
Okay, maybe I was very much entrenched in that old world. To get people to move to the new world, is it for someone like you a really big challenge?
Yes, it is.
And people just so stuck in their ways that they either won't embrace what you've got to teach, or they'll hear what you've got to say, but again, they'll just revert back to type and stick with what they know.
It's really difficult, especially for people that have been around in the business world for many years, and especially in certain industries that hadn't caught up as quickly, because the way they're behaving is completely rational, provided that you still exist in that old world. But the problem is all of their mental models are based upon a world that's no longer there anymore. So while to them, this is oh, well, this worked in the past, this has always worked, this is how I've done business my entire life, I'm not going to change now. It just doesn't make sense if the entire world has changed around you and that way doesn't even exist anymore. So that's where I have the most difficulty. And with organizations, what I find is that it's usually people that are up at the top of the system that are still stuck in the old mindset. And so the people at the bottom essentially want to change. They're on the ground floor in the trenches, seeing that, well, this old way of doing stuff clearly isn't working because we're on the ground floor and we're seeing it not work. But the people that were sitting in a back office for years, essentially managing from the data on down, they just haven't seen that the world has changed around them while they weren't paying attention.
Got you. So give me an example of an industry that really frustrates you because of that then. Is there an industry out there that you get, this does my brains in?
There's a lot of them. So for one, I was actually talking about this just this week. The insurance industry is one that is really still stuck in this mindset. So I've done consulting for various insurance companies over the years, and they're pretty much scrambling to try catching up now, because the insurance industries have been able to do really well, kind of riding on the coattails of their own success for many years. And we have very large insurance companies that had a very well-established set of processes, things that worked, actuarial measures worked really well in that old kind of world. And we have a series of new and upcomers that are essentially going to be able to almost overnight disrupt this industry, because they're leveraging things like data science, leveraging things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So in the old days of doing insurance, essentially you had a couple metrics you were using to determine the risk of a person, their gender, their age, whether they're a smoker or not, or if it's an automobile, the make, the model, what city you're driving in. So very kind of coarsely grained measures. But in this new world where we have the Internet of Things, we have the ability to capture data from a variety of sensors at very fine-grained resolutions. We can do things like having microinsurance, where essentially you are only paying for insurance from the moment you turn the key in the ignition in the car until you get to your destination. And all of the variables involved in you driving, like what city you're driving in, what roads you're driving in, what the traffic density was at that time, how safely you drove during that time, who was sitting in the car, all of these factors can be used in order to finely tune your insurance rate, so that you're only paying what you need to be paying and you're not overpaying. These things optimize our markets when we leverage this kind of data and this analysis.
That kind of stuff. You think about how relevant that kind of stuff is just in that one industry. This is fascinating. So essentially it's going to be more beneficial for the consumer.
Everyone.
Okay.
Everyone.
And in essence, obviously it's beneficial for the business as well, isn't it? Because
other examples, the medical industry. I mean, obviously, doctors have ingrained ways of doing things for many years about how to diagnose and treat diseases. Something we're going to see happen in the very near future is that, and I'm guessing I might be overstepping my bounds here, but I'm guessing in the very near future, doctors will actually have a consult with an artificial intelligence system. The doctor will look at the x-rays, he'll look at all the tests, he'll essentially assess and then make a diagnosis based on what he sees, and the machine will essentially have access to all of the same data in digital form. The machine will make a decision or a diagnosis based on its information. If the doctor and the machine are in agreement, then they'll go forward with the recommended treatment. However, if they disagree, they'll probably pull in a third party in order to act as a tiebreaker who will not know which decision or diagnosis the doctor gave and which decision the machine gave, so that it'll be an unbiased kind of diagnosis as well. And I'm guessing this is essentially how the medical industry will function going forward, at least for another few decades, because we now are to a point where these machines are actually better than human doctors at a variety of tasks that we have always thought humans would be better at for a long time. For example, we can have machines do diagnostics on x-rays and actually detect microfractures in bones that the human doctors just can't see in x-rays. We can also do things like have machines look at multispectral brain imaging and actually come up with diagnoses that a human doctor couldn't do because of the amount of data you have to look at simultaneously, and small weak signals of like a cancerous tumor in the cells around an actual growth in a brain as well. In addition, for example, in the world of cancer research, one of the most interesting applications of this technology is where when we're diagnosing cancer, we have a database of people that have had cancer with their genome, their DNA essentially, and the DNA of the tumor that they had as well too. And then we also have all of the treatments that were tried on them and the success rate of the treatment and then the side effects that occurred for this person. Given a massive database of hundreds of thousands of people with their DNA, the DNA of their tumor, the treatment, and the side effects, we can then put in a new person with their DNA, their tumor's DNA, and then have it spit out a prediction as to which treatment would be most likely to be successful and what the potential side effects are going to be, and give us statistical probabilities as to those side effects. And if it can't come up with an existing treatment, it can look at the interactions of chemical compounds with that specific growth's DNA and then synthesize a new chemical and tell you the likelihood of success based upon all of the data in the data set. So this is just completely different than anything we've been doing in the past.
Which is nuts when you think about it, but phenomenal as well, because of the benefit it's going to give to all of the people that are on the receiving end of that.
Yep. Drug discovery is being hugely influenced by this, like having personalized pharmaceuticals as well too. I mean, there's almost every sector of our economy is going to be radically disrupted by this set of technologies: data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence in the years to come. Okay,
let's bring it back to the kind of people that will be watching this show. So small business owners, network marketers, direct salespeople, people that call themselves entrepreneurs. Okay, which I generally call small business owners, but they fit into that category, or solopreneurs, mumpreneurs as well. We hear that kind of stuff quite a lot. People that are out there with essentially an eye on focusing on bringing revenue into their business so that they can feed themselves and give themselves a lifestyle that they want to. Those types of people I find are still using lots of old-fashioned tools and technology, old world as you describe it. And they're very resistant to change because they base a lot of their thinking around the fact that people are people. And so you have to communicate with people. And so maybe that includes, I have to make cold calls to generate leads. Or, you can't sell to everybody, but, if you get better at upskilling yourself in your negotiating skills, then you've got a better chance of converting that person. Whereas I'm firmly of the belief of, why don't you target the people that are the right people to target rather than having a scattergun approach? And if you targeted the right people, who would they be? Okay, and stay away from the people that don't fit you, but also understand yourself much better so that that you know the kind of people you sell to. So let's go old world for a second. I used to like selling to Germans, all right? Because Germans never procrastinated. They would say yes or no. And it was simple as that. And it's a wonderful thing to experience when you're a salesman, because no's just as good as yes, because you can move on with your life.
Yeah.
It's the maybe, let me think about it, let me come back to you, give me some time type of responses that invariably drive people mad. So I would sell to Germans. I would sell to Dutch and Scandinavians in the same way, because they were good at making decisions. They just had a bit more of a personality than some of the Germans that we used to deal with. So that kind of category would be where I would focus. So when I was selling all of those years, it's like, right, I need to find, where are the Germans?
Yeah.
You know, where are the Germans in this city? Or where are the Germans in? Where are the German buyers? Where are the German decision makers? Lots of people don't see it that way and don't think that way, but that's like an old school way. They would just, doesn't matter, I'll try and sell anything to anyone that I can, and whether they're selling real estate or whether you're selling insurance, finance, financial services, or whether you're selling cars, doesn't matter what you're selling really. You're a small business owner, you're in network marketing. Think about in network marketing who you try and target. Whether you work for one of these companies like Forever Living or Jeunesse or Oriflame, they're all out there. How are you targeting your market? How are you identifying who are the people that are relevant to you? I've been marketed to people that are trying to sell me cosmetics, and I'm like, that's as dumb as that can be. I'm not buying cosmetics, but people still will have that kind of approach. Bearing all of those things in mind, what kind of hacks do you think that salespeople could use just to be a bit smarter with what they're doing than carrying on down this forever path that's just essentially pulling them further and further and further into the void, into the darkness, into the past, than moving with the times, as you express people need to do?
Well, I feel like this could go in many different directions. I've got a lot of examples I could give, but I'll start and I'll try capturing as many of them as possible. So the first thing I think is important to point out is that there's this old saying in the world of marketing that only half of the marketing that I'm doing is actually effective. The real question is figuring out which half. But that was, once again, the old way of thinking. And the new way of thinking is, we have access to tremendous amounts of data that can be used in order to make better decisions about marketing. For example, we can do kind of fine-grained analysis of demographics and do cluster analysis. We can do market segmentation, and then figure out exactly who it is that would be most likely to based upon all of the data we have access to and data that we're gathering as well, and then experiments that we're running in order to fine-tune our understanding of our market. So while in the old world, they might have just said, well, we're going to spend this many dollars on television advertising, and this many dollars on cold calls, and this many dollars on whatever. Nowadays, you can do things like go into Facebook, and you can say, well, I want to specifically target people that are of this age, of this gender, that have this type of preference, that live in this city, in this specific neighborhood even, and get down to very, very fine-grained analysis of the people and essentially their based on your knowledge of who your market is, and then run experiments where you essentially market to them and see what kind of hits you get, and then start looking at the data that corresponds or correlates with those hits as well. Well, we found that actually when we expanded to this older demographic and we switched from male to female, and then we looked for people that had an income of this, that we actually found more hits. So now we can kind of shift our understanding of who our key demographic is based on this kind of fine-grained understanding of the data and the experiments that we can run gathering new data in order to improve our processes over time. The other thing that I think beyond just kind of data-driven decision-making that's critical for small business owners is this understanding of things like agile software development practices, or agile in general, lean startup, and just the lean way of thinking.
What does that mean?
So we'll take a step back. Lean originally comes from the Toyota production system back in, I think it was the 1970s. They were doing some pretty revolutionary things with manufacturing at the time and came up with a set of principles that essentially kind of governed how to operate in the new world, before most people had even figured out that there was a new world even on the horizon. And so the kind of principles of this are doing things like in the agile space, as far as like agile software development, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, like making working software as the actual measure of success, and a series of other things that essentially optimize or essentially help you to decide what things you should be investing on and what things you shouldn't be focusing on. And I think if I summed it up into a single word, it would be rapid, well, 2 words, rapid feedback. So running experiments in ways that gather as much data as possible, using the data to drive your decision making, and then using what you've learned from each of these experiments to optimize over time. So rather than in the old world, we might have said, like, the marketing director would say, well, we're going to throw this many dollars at marketing on this specific campaign because, well, I like this campaign. I think it's going to be successful. That's just an opinion. There's no data to back that. So now what we'd do is we'd create a series of experiments. We'll just say 2, for example. So we're going to try, marketing campaign A and marketing campaign B. We run it in a very small subset, just to see how both of those campaigns perform. We find out that marketing campaign A works way better than B. So, well, let's invest a bit more in it. And we'll run 2 different experiments. We'll change the headline on the campaign and 2 different A and B experiments again. Which of these 2 do better? Okay, well, B worked better this time, so let's put more money into that, and let's change the way we've emotionally worded the content of the message. One way is stronger and one way is weaker. Oh, the stronger one's working, so now we go this way. And essentially, you're teasing your way through the path of least resistance to maximize the impact of your marketing message by running these small experiments. And the thing to keep in mind is that in the old world, failure was a bad thing. So if you launched a marketing campaign and you spent $100,000 trying to push this message with this specific product and this specific whatever it is you're targeting, and it failed, that was a bad thing. You'd probably lose your job or they'd reprimand you. But in the new world, if you're running these small experiments, we're only spending a couple $100 on each little experiment because we're doing it in a very rapid, iterative way. And that's allowing us to get to the right answers by making a series of very small mistakes to essentially avoid epic failure. So in the new world, you have to think in terms of what we call smart failure, this idea that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're learning from that mistake and that the value of learning is greater than the cost of the mistake itself. Just a radically different way of thinking about
experimentation. The value of learning is greater than the cost of the mistake.
Yeah, and I shouldn't even word it as a mistake. The cost of the positive versus the negative case in that.
The experience,
yeah.
Okay, so I've got a new business. I'm a new guy starting out in business. Okay, I understand. Let's take one of my particular clients. So, I have a client that has developed these bags to replace plastic bags.
Okay.
And smart person, so she's a smart lady. She's got this product. She really wants to get it out to the market. Okay, she hasn't done a huge amount of market research, and she doesn't know how to go about. All she knows is that for the cost of plastic bags, she can replace it with this bag that's essentially a reusable bag.
Yep.
Okay, and has all the benefits of being biodegradable, all that kind of stuff. She wants to go out to the market, and essentially her target customer to start with have got to be the big supermarket chains, the Carrefours and the Giants and the ones that are here in the UAE. Her marketing plan is stuck in the dark ages as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Because to me, she's not doing the research that she needs to do to find the kind of people that are going to buy it. In different countries, there'll be different people with different theories towards this and there's different behavior patterns. In the UK, they may be fully into this whole plastic bags are bad.
Yep.
Okay, but in France, they may be, it's not really relevant to us right now.
Yep.
What is that here in the United Arab Emirates where we are for her? And how can she, if she doesn't have that data, how can she easily access it? And then how can she apply that knowledge towards her business?
Well, I feel like we have to take even further step back. So the way I would approach this scenario, and the way like the lean startup movement would approach this as well, is not build a product until you know there's actually a problem that needs to be solved. So that's square one. So first you would essentially do an analysis of the problem. You'd run a set of experiments to try determining whether this problem actually exists. So the assumption is that there are people that are concerned that having plastic bags is bad for the environment, and that they would be willing to purchase these reusable bags in order to help save the planet. So if you can run an experiment at low cost that you can actually assess how big this problem actually is, are there people that actually are willing to pay X amount of dollars in order to solve this problem? Run that as an experiment first, and then don't even think about the solution until you've identified the problem. So, and I would probably even be doing it more open-ended than that. I would probably run an experiment to say, hey, who is interested in actually like saving the environment? Like, what things do you think you would do in order to save the environment? And toss out, plastic bag as one of like 5 different options, and see who would rank that as like one of the things that they would really want to do. And then after you've assessed whether a problem actually exists, you start looking at the various solutions to it. So you start running another set of experiments where you're trying to propose different solutions to a group of people to see whether they would actually be willing to buy the solution, or they believe this solution would solve their problem in a way that makes sense economically. At that point in time, you'd start looking at the stickiness of your solution. So is this something that people are going to use once and then they're just going to get rid of it, or are they going to continue using this and buying this all the time in order to make it worthwhile, like it's continued sustainable value? Then start looking at the virality of it. Are your neighbors going to tell one another about, oh, hey, I bought this new bag, and then they're going to buy additional bags? Or how is this going to spread? What's the growth model of this? Is it viral, or is it just, it's this cluster of people is going to use it and then it's going to fizzle out? And then after that, you start looking at things like, well, how are you going to scale this? How are you going to monetize this? And you wouldn't even be really considering these things early on in this way of thinking. You would essentially just be looking at the problem, looking at the solution, and then looking at whether it's sticky or not, whether it's viral or not, before you even start looking at, well, what is the final business model going to look like? Because if you have something that is truly valuable to people, they will pay money for it. That's just going to happen. So focus on essentially solving a real problem in the world first, and then worry about the details afterwards.
Okay.
And you can do this in a very data-driven mindset. In fact, drawing lines in the sand. So for example, if we did a survey of 100 people, and we found that over 50% of them were interested in purchasing this product, then we knew we were successful. So draw a line in the sand to say, my hypothesis is that 50% of 100 people that I sample would be interested in purchasing this product. If they are, then we make this product. If they are not, then we try something else. And you just keep running these kind of experiments over and over and over until you really understand your market in a way that your competitors operating in the old world have no idea. Essentially, the people in the old world are flying an airplane in fog without instrumentation. And you have an aircraft with instruments, so you can land an airplane in fog. They can't.
Okay. What kind of an impact does having the tools that exist with social media nowadays adds to people to be able to do the kind of research that you're talking about?
Well, I think it gives you access to people and marketing in completely different ways. So for example, if you were doing advertising in the past, you would essentially put an ad on TV and you'd reach a really wide audience. You'd pay a lot of money. You might have a couple hits. But with social media, you can essentially do analysis on the demographics and then target your message just to those people that are most likely to respond. And then, like we discussed before, run experiments to see what the true market is rather than what your perception of the market is. You always have to start with a hypothesis of some kind, and then you essentially just either confirm or reject that hypothesis and continue narrowing down exactly what the true nature of reality is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you look at the kind of things that people do nowadays in sales to try and market, we all know that you can market through Facebook and target certain groups to learn more about them or to attract them to your product. But there's more you can do when you as a business developer, is by really understanding yourself. And a lot of people, particularly in business development and sales, have a perspective, a view of themselves which isn't necessarily true. I'll give you an example. Some people will say, like I do, I'm quite good at selling to Germans. So, but am I? If I feel I'm good at selling to Germans, because of, as I explained what I did earlier, that's one point of view. But what's the data to say whether I am or not?
Well, I think the first thing that's really important to understand is that human beings, despite the fact we think we're really good at like making these kinds of assessments, we're actually pretty bad at it. There's entire books written on things, like one of them is called Predictably Irrational, that essentially exposes all of the things that human beings do that are completely irrational, but predictably so. Like we will continue making these errors in judgment because our brains are just wired to do it. So, for example, there's something called the type 1 error bias. This is this idea that we ascribe more weight to things. Well, let's see. I want to make sure that I word this right. Let's see. Maybe I should just give an example. So all superstitions essentially evolve out of this error bias. This idea that me, every time I tapped this cup, something good happened to me. So this is my magic cup. But every time I, touch this water glass, it never occurred to me that anything good or bad happened. So this is just a water glass, but this is my magic cup. Because my mind, for whatever reason, wires up the cause and effect between me tapping this cup and good things happening, but it doesn't wire it up with the glass of water. So we essentially make these errors in judgment all the time because our brains were designed to survive in a very different context than we currently exist in. And our brains weren't designed to be supercomputers that were essentially doing statistical analyses of data. But if you use your gut to make certain decisions, that's perfectly fine. There are cases where using your gut to make a decision makes absolute sense. But then there's other cases where you should be using the data to make the decision. So say, for example, you think, I'm great at selling to Germans. Could you actually run an experiment that could verify that? Like, come up with a hypothesis. I'm good at selling, or I'm better at selling to Germans than I am at selling to everyone else. And then essentially run an experiment where you analyze the database of all of your contacts and you determine whether you actually had statistically significant increases in performance when selling to Germans versus everyone else. That simple experiment would then confirm or reject your hypothesis, and you probably find out that no, it's actually the fact that all of the German customers were males instead of females that was actually the deciding factor, or something along those lines. You'll probably learn something more than what your hypothesis was, or learn that your hypothesis was completely wrong. But this is all good because every time you learn something like this, whether you're right or you're wrong, is you've improved your kind of point of view of the world, which is valuable.
The data tells everything. It gives the answers. A lot of people don't like the data because it gives them that answer. So they're kind of shy of facing it almost. It's like, I believe this. And so whilst I believe this, then that's what it will be. And if the data flies in the face of what they believe and it challenges their belief or their expectation, then it's not always that people want to tolerate that or kind of embrace it. Have you experienced that?
So this comes down to two things, I think. Number one is our own egos. Essentially, once again, you really have to take a step back to certain cultures and certain benefits of sticking to your guns on your ideas. So in the past, it would have made sense to stick to your gun on an idea because data didn't exist in order to prove you right or wrong. So if you were the captain and you were steering the ship and you didn't want to mutiny on your hands because you decided to go through the rough waters instead of taking the long way around, you needed to be able to stick to your guns and make your argument and have everyone trust that you were right because you're the captain. But if you had data that said, no, actually going the other way would have been safer, the captain doesn't want to hear that because sticking to his guns is how he keeps his crew in under control. And so a lot of people will really struggle with this when the data is essentially telling us something else. Now, obviously, there can be problems with the data that lead to an incorrect decision, even using a data-driven approach. But when it comes down to either trusting my gut based on limited information or trusting the data and being able to run an experiment to either confirm or reject a hypothesis, I will almost always go with the data-driven approach. Once again, provided that the cost of running the experiment or the value that knowing this answer is greater than the cost of running the experiment. Because if we're just trying to decide whether we should go out for pizza or Chinese for lunch, doing a poll of the audience in order to confirm whether we have statistically significant differences of opinion is probably a waste of time.
Okay, final question.
Sure.
Are salespeople a dying breed? With the advent of Clickfunnels and lots of other tools that are very similar to Clickfunnels and opportunities for people to generate sales online, with people now buying so much more without going into a retail setting, with businesses now choosing different approaches to buy products because they want to get either the lowest price or the best bang for their buck. Does the salesman, in any industry, is he a dying breed? Is he going to die? Is he going to fade away? And if he's not, why not?
Well, it's really difficult to predict these kind of things, but what I can tell you is that there are people out there that are currently building models that are trying to determine which jobs are most at risk in our economy, in various sectors of our economy. And so depending upon the repetitiveness and complexity of a job, we can essentially ascribe a score to it as to how likely it is to be replaced. So if it's highly repetitive, it's likely to be replaced. If it's not very repetitive, less likely. And if it's simple, it's more likely to be replaced. And if it's complex, it's less likely. So you've got that two-dimensional matrix, and you've got this score assigned to all these jobs. And then you look at all of the various jobs in different sectors of the economy, and then you determine which ones are most likely to be eliminated. What I can tell you is that from all the studies I've seen, there are certain jobs that are highly likely to be eliminated in the next few decades, and there's other jobs that are unlikely to based on these criteria and few other things as well. So the ones that look like they're unlikely to be replaced in the near future, certain aspects of nursing, certain aspects of education, especially educating children, and certain very high-touch, very human kind of jobs as well too. So therapists, counselors, those kind of things, psychologists. But jobs that are likely to be replaced are largely anything involving manual labor, anything involving repetitive knowledge work of any kind, so accounting, clerical, things like that, and like logistics as well too. And then what we see happening in the kind of in the in-between area is that we won't be eliminating the job, and the job won't be the way it used to be. It will essentially be a fusion of technology and human interaction. So my best prediction would be that I don't think being a salesperson is going to disappear. Certain aspects of a salesperson job, yes, will absolutely disappear, and certain types of sales jobs will absolutely disappear. But a salesperson, I think, is going to be more a person that is using technology in order to maximize the likelihood of sales, and doing things like these data-driven experimentation, using things like your Salesforce application to help you decide where to invest your time based upon all the data and all the historical trends. But you will essentially be being augmented. Like, artificial intelligence is going to augment the salesperson's power of sales, I guess.
Okay, makes a whole load of sense. All right, for now, our salespeople, our jobs are safe. Yes! Okay, but we have to remember that we've got to embrace technology as much as we can, and if we work for an organization where that doesn't happen, you need to start seeing forward rather than looking back. Matthew, thank you so much for coming to join us and share your insights and your knowledge. This guy knows stuff. If you want to follow Matt, I'll make sure that the link's at the bottom of this video for you. If you want to engage with him in any way, then you want to send him emails, ask him questions, and I'll find out what value he could bring to the businesses that you run, then please get in touch with him, because I'm sure he'll be only too happy to help out. Yeah?
Absolutely.
All right, good stuff. Take care, and whatever you do today, remember to do smart things like that man does over there, and that's to get out and make it happen. We'll see you soon.